present this message. Thank you for His Son who has died for us, and may we be a witness to the world. That's my prayer. In the blessed name of prayer. Okay, the presentation is called Starlight as a Bullet, and I'll explain that later. The next slide is actually a video by Sylvia Kashishian. She is someone I met in Manhattan, New York, and she works for the American Bible Society. So I'll go ahead and let you.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. And God said,
"Let there be light."
And there was light. God saw the light was good, and He separated it from the darkness. He called the light
Day,
and the darkness He called
night.
And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said,
Let there be an expanse to divide waters from the waters.
And God made the expanse, and divided the waters which were under the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse
Heaven.
And the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said,
You waters under the sky, be gathered together and let dry land appear.
And it was so. And God called the dry land
Earth.
and the gathering together of the waters.
Seas.
And God saw that it was good. And God said,
Earth, bring forth grass, herb, yield your seed, and the fruit tree yield your fruit after your kind. Your seeds in itself upon the earth.
And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said,
Let there be lights in the sky to divide day from night. Let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and for years. Let them light up the sky and give light on the earth.
And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and God set them in the sky to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And God said,
Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that have life, and birds that may fly above the earth in the open sky.
And God created great whales, and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying,
Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the sea, and birds multiply on the earth.
And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And God said,
Let the earth bring forth the living creature after its kind, cattle, beasts of earth, and creeping things after their kind.
And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said,
Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let him have dominion over all the fish of the sea, birds of the air, cattle and all of the earth, and creeping things that creep on the ground.
So God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said to them,
Be fruitful and multiply on earth and replenish it. Subdue it and rule over the fish and the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on earth. I give you seeded herbs and fruit trees for your food, and herbs for birds and beasts and creeping things on earth.
And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and saw it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work which he had made. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made.
The voice of the singer is Gregory Cross. He's a son of Lane Cross. I don't know if anybody know her, but she lives in Grand Junction. All right. If someone could look up Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Go ahead and read that.
Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from the work of creation that he had done. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens.
Okay, and then there's this book by Russell Humphrey, Starlight and Time, and he deals with what's called the distant starlight problem. And I'm going to go ahead and read from that. This is on page 9 and 10. Solving the unsolvable problem. When I have spoken on the positive physical evidences for a recent creation, an extremely common question many people ask is, if the universe is so young, how can we see light from stars that are more than 10,000 light years away? Light year is the distance that light travels at its present speed in 1 year. For example, consider the most frequently observable, very distant objects that astronomers can see in the sky, galaxies. Galaxies are very large clusters of stars, typically 100 billion or so, roughly 100,000 light years in diameter. There are about 100 billion galaxies within the viewing range of our best telescopes. The galaxy we are a part of, the Milky Way, is a very typical galaxy. I'm going to fast forward through some of this. In the southern hemisphere, people can see our nearest neighbor galaxies, the two Magellanic Clouds, with the naked eye. They're supposed to be on the order of 100,000 light years away. The most distant galaxy astronomers have observed to date is supposed to be about 12 billion light years away. If the universe is young, people ask, how can we be seeing light from such distant objects? Some laymen pondering this question wonder if astronomers' estimates of distances might be greatly in error. I don't think so. Astronomers have dozens of methods for estimating such distances, all of which generally agree with one another. Many of the methods, especially for closer objects such as the Andromeda Galaxy, are based on very reasonable assumptions, such as the overall size or brightness of a galaxy. For that reason, I'm convinced that the large distances are generally correct, at least within a factor of 2 or so. Certainly it is hard to imagine how correcting errors in all of these methods could somehow shrink, say, the 12 billion light years mentioned above down to 10,000 light years. Thus, the question represents a problem which is very real and needs to be answered. So I read that just to kind of explain what the distant starlight problem is, because a lot of people don't know. Okay, so this next part will be a video from Relevance of Physics, and this was by Dr. Wanzer, who is a creation physicist.
And in the next 27 years since then, I've become really convinced that there's far more evidence for supporting recent six-day creation and global flood than there is old Earth and evolution. Just takes a while to figure it out. Okay, now, let's go back to physics, some other things. Not only does it affect the studies of the age of the Earth and universe, but here's the other thing that makes physics fascinating to people in the long run, okay? And that is that it affects our concepts of reality. In other words, notions of space and time. In other words, we have these strange concepts from relativity of, as you watch something moving by, it appears to be shorter. And it actually is shorter if you were to measure it. And we have this length contraction. We have time dilation. And that's been experimentally measured to many decimals, okay? It really happens that when something's moving by, clocks tick differently in two different reference frames, okay? Very interesting. Notions of simultaneity are all messed up. In other words, things that are simultaneous, events that are simultaneous in one reference frame are not simultaneous in a moving reference frame. Okay, so if you have two people that die here, one dies here, one dies here. The classic example is there's a cannon in the middle, and you shoot a bullet out to each person the same distance away, and they each die in your reference frame at the same time. Now, if somebody's going by and watching that, they will not agree on who died first. Right? They won't die at the same time. Okay, so that's a kind of an interesting thing that happens. And there's experiments you can do to confirm that that indeed is the case. Then there's special and general relativity and curved space, all these bizarre things. And of course, that leads to black holes and whatnot. There's the quantum mechanics kinds of things, the so-called wave-particle duality. What is a wave and what is a particle? What we find out is that things that we think of as waves, like electromagnetic radiation, they have particle-like properties. They act kind of like bullets at times. They carry momentum and strange things like that. But then we find out the particles that normally you expect just to, if you have two openings, you expect it to go through one or the other. We find out that on the small scale of things, and you have two openings in a screen, that particle appears to have gone through both, not just one or the other. If you block one of the screen, there's no interference pattern, but when you leave both the holes open, you get a classical interference pattern, which is what you get with light and wave-like phenomena. So it's kind of interesting. And that's really the heart of all of quantum mechanics, is this interference with particles. We have tunneling effects. Tunneling effects are strange things. Tunneling effect is like, imagine a marble in a big salad bowl. Okay, like this. And you just give it a little energy, and the marble goes back and forth in the salad bowl, right? And it can't get out if you don't give it enough energy. That's classically. In quantum mechanics, that marble can go out without having enough energy to go out. It's quite interesting. And then we have this quantum indeterminacy, which says that you can't measure things as accurately as you want. You can't measure things to arbitrary accuracy in space or time. You can't measure energy arbitrarily accurately. You can't measure position arbitrarily accurately or momentum arbitrarily accurately. There are these things you can't make simultaneous measurements on certain quantities. So it's kind of strange. So it affects our whole notions of reality. And so a lot of, even theology is impacted by the notions. It's kind of neat in some ways, because now we can kind of conceive ways how God can have a completely different concept of time than we have. We really couldn't conceive of that before relativity and curved space and all this kind of thing. We had no idea. Not that we know how God does things, but we can at least appreciate it. That he can be outside of time, that he can see the end from the beginning, that his reference frame is different than ours. And we can appreciate that. But it also leads to other things in cosmology, that we can allow processes happening far away to happen at different rates than processes here on Earth. Okay, and that is a key to a lot of things. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay. Now, the potential collapse of deep time would be devastating to evolution. So that's something that physicists would like to focus on. And this is one of the things that the rate group is doing, is trying to figure out a way to collapse the deep time that is suggested by radioactive dating. Okay, the rate group from ICR, the radioisotopes in the age of the Earth. And Larry Vardaman's going to tell us the latest on that, and that should be very interesting. And the search for a magic bullet or scale factor to collapse this deep time, given its potential significance, is a worthy long-term pursuit for young Earth creationists. And I mean long-term because you have to be in it, for the duration. You can't just go and play at these things. And unfortunately, most of us in the creation business, or let's put it this way, the majority of us, we may not be producing the most things, are hobbyists. We don't have time to be full-time. There's only a handful of people who are full-time researchers in the creation movement, and they need way more support and way more help, okay, and way more prayers from the church at large. And every one of you as Christians should and could pray, that the Lord will send more laborers into his harvest and help raise up other folks. And I hope, my prayer for you folks is that you'll go out fired up here, and you'll go back to your churches and get other people fired up and convince your people that, look, part of their missions budget should be directed to creation ministries, because that's mission to America. And if you lose a mission to America, you lose mission to everywhere. Okay, and that's really important. People haven't quite seen that in the church, and that's how we've lost a lot of people, a lot of young folks. I'm on the university campus almost every day, and I see them and I talk to them, and evolution is the big stumbling block. That is the stumbling block, especially for the kids in the sciences. The kids that aren't in the sciences, they don't really care so much. Yeah, so what? They're in humanities, so what? Everything's philosophy, everything's relative. They don't really care. But the people that are worried about facts, the chemists, the physics people, the math people, the biology people, people who are potentially very important to society and could become movers and shakers in the future society, those folks are getting lost to evolution. And so we've got to make an impact. We've got to do better. Anyway, this is, I call, the holy grail of young earth creation science. May or may never happen. We may never get a magic scale factor, as we like to call it. However, Ken recently, it was kind of nice, he just wrote an article for me so I don't have to explain it. In the recent Creation magazine, he wrote an article called Searching for the Magic Bullet, okay? And I really support that article. I think it was dead on, right on. It's extremely important that we realize that we may never find this magic bullet, and we shouldn't jump on the bandwagon every time a new evidence comes out supporting creation. We need to see that these evidences stand the test of time. They stand critical scrutiny, because that's the way things work in science.
So, as you heard, he mentioned something about a magic bullet. He was making reference to radiation and decay rates, but there's also what I've found to be a magic bullet for light and our measurement for things in space. So, really, to get into this, I'm going to have to kind of explain a little bit about these two key things, the relativity and quantum mechanics, which I have a dictionary, and it's real concise. It doesn't get into the crazy math or anything like that. Quantum mechanics is a system of mechanics that is developed from quantum theory and is used to explain the behavior of atoms, molecules, etc. In one form, In one form, it is based on de Broglie's idea that particles can have wave-like properties. This branch of quantum mechanics is called wave mechanics. So, quantum mechanics is basically physics of things very small that we can't really see. And then relativity. Special relativity was based on two postulates: that the physical laws are the same in all inertial frames of reference. And number two, that the speed of light in a vacuum is a constant for all observers regardless of motion of the source or observer. Now, years later, Einstein went on and put gravity into the mix. And that was general relativity. General relativity seeks to explain the difference between between accelerated and non-accelerated systems and the nature of the forces in both of them. Explaining this further, this led Einstein to view that gravitation is a sequence of the geometry of the universe. He visualized a four-dimensional space-time continuum in which the presence of mass affects the geometry. Space is curved by the mass. So, relativity is basically science of things very large and dealing with gravity. So, continue on. And so, I have a very interesting part to read out of Gentleman's Guide to Physics. You might be surprised after I read this. You wouldn't expect this to be in a physics book, but bear with me. Let's see. Let's start with a little bit of an introduction. direction. I need to go to the next frame, actually. I have this picture that I actually copied out of the book. You have these different levels, and this bottom part says the hierarchical structure of theory of planetary motion. So it starts out raw data, just like numbers, and they have Kepler's laws, Newtonian, relativity, and then further levels, and then there's actually different kinds of math that match up with each one of those. So the book kind of explains, in a given hierarchy of theories, the lowest level is the only one which is directly related to empirical facts. I think I'll skim on to, I think I'll just jump clear to what the highest level is. The highest level which has not been attained would explain all forces in nature, and not only the gravitational forces, by one unifying principle, perhaps by complicated non-Euclidean geometry of four-dimensional spacetime. Euclidean is like just basic geometry, where you have 3 dimensions. Non-Euclidean, more. This would be the universal law of Einstein's dreams, which some younger physicists are still searching for. I would guess that the idea of an ultimate universal law of nature should appeal to many people with religious inclinations. The ultimate law may be identified with God, and the discovery of this law could be interpreted in religious terms as a return of man to God. Thus, science might possibly become the base for some kind of cosmic religion, and the science research might accelerate such development. Kind of an interesting thing in a physics book. So, now, in this book, with Arthur Morse, it's referring to that idea of unifying these laws together. And Arthur Morse, he is actually a retired physicist in Montrose, Colorado. He used to work in Los Alamos. So he's a pretty advanced physicist. I'm surprised that someone like that would be in Montrose, Colorado. And I ended up with one of his books for free. The chapter is called Guts and Toes, and he asks, what are they? Grand unification theories, guts, and theories of everything, toes, are at the forefront of theoretical physics. For the purpose of this book, they are almost the same thing. The first understates the breadth of the subject, as used here. The second overstates it. The purpose of a theory of everything, narrowly stated, is to find a relationship between fundamental constants, so there won't be so many of them. The same thing for fundamental particles. A grand unified theory, which is GUT, G-U-T, is one that unifies the various quantum mechanical theories of matter and energy, but does not necessarily include quantum gravity. So I think that's pretty much all I need to cover on that. So, as I was a kid, I was raised Seventh-day Adventist. I knew about the creation account. I was also into astronomy. And I saw there was a problem, which was this distant starlight problem. Many years later, I thought about it, and I came to the conclusion, if you're looking at small atoms, little tiny things, you can't even keep track of what's going on. They're just a blur. If you look out in space, it's just the opposite. You're looking at something in space and it's hardly moving, and it's called time dilation. Things are happening faster, but you don't see it that way. And I thought this might be the answer. That the more space you have, time seems slow. And small area of space, rate of time seems to be a lot faster. So I started looking on the internet for a theory or something that had something like that. And I found this, Max Morris's Simply Relativity, and I've got a picture of it. So what he's got here, and he's trying to unify the laws of physics. I'm just trying to solve the distant starlight problem. But that goes back to the guts and toes. This is a unified theory he's attempting to make. And the bottom part is time. where it's going across more time, less time. Up and down is space. And so the more space you have, rate of time slow. The more time you have, the amount of space you have is less. So from this, I developed a speculative equation. Basically, for the dilations, we have time times an effect with quantum mechanics, and some brackets, or parentheses, and then time divided by relativity effect, and then you get this distortion. So that was my kind of a hypothesis, early hypothesis. But then I thought, if this is true, if I am actually onto something, if God actually created the universe in this way, when He spoke it by His word, I thought, well, the Bible is also God's spoken word, it's His written word. And so I pondered if there was a ratio of this somewhere in Scripture. And so we go to the question between what is the relationship between God's spoken and written word. So I have some quotes from Ellen White, and this is Fundamentals of Christian Education. The laws obeyed by the earth reveal the fact that it is under the masterly power of an infinite God. The same principles run through the spiritual and the natural world. That's page 375. The machinery of the earth and heaven needs many faces to every wheel in order to see the hand beneath the wheels, bringing perfect order from confusion. Page 409. And if you notice, the wheels is actually a slight hint to chapter 1 in Ezekiel, which is a very strange chapter. But this kind of hints that something I thought all along, that Ezekiel was actually referring to physics in the universe with these wheels within wheels. Another quote, it is the Word of God alone that gives us an authentic account of the creation of our world. Page 536. So, back to finding this magic bullet. And I found it. I was looking for two parts. Remember, there was like one at the quantum mechanics, one at relativity. And I was expecting a part that's small and another part that's large. And they're going to be inverse of each other, meaning like if you have 1 divided by 2, the 1 is inverse of the other. So here's the verse that I finally found that had two parts and it had time in it. It says, "But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord," and I added equals and put some sections in there. "One day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." So keep going. The question is asked, where is the Lord? It's an interesting question. I don't think most people have thought about that verse. But so I commenced to start looking in Scripture. So if someone could look up Psalms chapter 11, verse 4. And somewhere in this presentation, I noticed a couple verses that I put in the wrong verse. I don't think it's in these, but like it would be the next verse, or where I didn't put separate the chapter and verse.
The Lord is in His holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, His eyelids past the sons of men.
Okay, and 1 Kings 8:24.
Who has kept with thy servant David, my father, whom thou promised him? Thou speakest also with thy mouth, and hast fulfilled it with thine hand, as it is this day.
Might be verse 23. Yeah, I think that's one that I put it wrong.
And he said, Lord God of Israel, there is no God like thee, in heaven above or on earth beneath. who keepest covenant and mercy with thy servants that walk before thee with all thy heart.
Okay. Job chapter 22, verses 12 through 14.
Is not God in the heights of heaven? And see how lofty are the highest stars? Yet you say, what does God know? Does he judge through such darkness? Thick clouds veil him, so he does not see us, as he goes about in the vaulted heavens.
Okay. And Job chapter 28, verse 24.
For he lifts the ends of the earth and seas and the heaven.
Alright. And Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 26.
And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness of the appearance of a man above it.
So, looking at these verses, especially the one in Job, is mentioning the height of the heavens. And in astronomy, the height of heaven is defined or called the light horizon. Anything further away than that, you can't see it because it's traveling away faster than light can travel to. So then I started to look and see what does Ellen White say about heaven. With undimmed vision, they gaze upon the glory of creation, suns and stars and systems, all in their appointed order, circling the throne of deity. And that's in Great Controversy, page 677. Adam and Eve were but little lower than angels, that they might not only discern the wonders of the visible universe, but comprehend the moral responsibilities and obligations. Education, page 20. It's kind of interesting. The term visible universe, she used that term before science did. Heaven is a school, its field of study, the universe, its teacher, the infinite one. That's in Heaven, page 146. There's far more being done by the universe of heaven than we have any idea of in preparing the way so that souls shall be converted. Evangelism, page 127. Okay, someone could look up Ephesians chapter 4, verses 8 through 15.
Therefore he says, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive, and gave gifts to men. Now this he ascended, what does it mean? But that he also first descended into the lower parts of the earth. He who descended is also the one who ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors, and teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind and doctrine, by the trickery of men, in the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting, but speaking the truth in love, may grow up in all things unto him who is the head, Christ.
I added the rest of the verses, kind of put context to that verse. So I ended up coming across these different verses and saw a paradox, if you will, where there's verses referring to God being in the height of the heavens, and then he walks the circle of the heavens, and where Ellen White was saying, where all creation circles the throne of God. And how can that be? How can you have a point at the height of the heavens where it's circling around you, but also where everything is circling around it. And this paralleled to a problem with Copernicus, like where they were wondering, do we go around the sun, or does the sun go around us? And it looks like the sun's going around us. But then also looking at what Ellen White said about the visible universe, and then referring to heaven as universe. This is kind of it's a little bit of conjecture. It's not very important, but I thought I'd share it anyway. I put this stuff together, these different points, and used some physics and put this together. Using information that we already know, we have the sun, and it rotates on its axis once every 25 days. The Earth is a certain distance from the sun. If Earth rotates once a day, it goes around the sun once a year. Also, if you look at the Earth relative to, if you think of the light horizon as a sphere around the Earth, you could look at it in reverse and consider that you see the surface of the light horizon go around the Earth once a day, and so on. I've got these different things. And then looking at that the verses 2 Peter 3:8, I was able to put in some other values and ended up calculating. I ended up able to come up with a calculation. If there was a universe of heaven, and it moved, if it rotated once every 1,000 years, I was able to calculate how often it would rotate around or how often we rotate around that universe, and its weight and the distance. And a curious thing here, you can't see at the bottom there, but it says 14 days. You end up having a possible physics for the Sabbath, where in physics you have what's called a rest cycle. If something is rotating, or say if you're swinging, if you're on a swing, when you reach the height of where you're moving forward, that's the rest cycle. Potential energy is the greatest. And then you swing back, and you're on another rest cycle. For something moving in a circle, you would have 2 rest cycles. If we are in a finite area called the visible universe, and it's moving around another point every 14 days, it would have an effect on us at the very small level, at the quantum mechanical level. And if the rest cycles are once a week, then there would be a benefit to resting in harmony with that cycle, and work against that cycle would have destructive effects at the quantum mechanical level. And then looking at Scripture with the destruction of Jericho, I thought it was interesting, where they marched around the city once a day for 6 days. On the 7th day, they marched around 7 times and blew their trumpets, and the building basically imploded. This is just kind of a conjecture. I have come up with an idea in actual science that may be able to test this theory, but I don't have a physics degree, so I'm not going to be doing that anytime recently. But it's just an interesting idea, and this shows the rest cycle and work cycle I was talking about. So anyway, getting back to the main subject, seeing the crystal sea, making sense of the light horizon. CMBR is cosmic microwave background radiation, and WMAP. WMAP is Wickelson. I wrote it down. It's a probe that, Wickelson microwave anthropophy probe, and it studies the light horizon anyway. The reason I mentioned crystal sea is Ezekiel, talking about that crystal sea and where God is above the crystal sea. If I was right about the theory where heaven is outside our visible universe, the crystal sea would be synonymous with the light horizon. And this is a picture of it. This is the oldest light in our universe. it is not light from stars. And astronomy refers to this light as the afterglow of cosmic creation. Now, what light, studying the Bible, is the oldest light? It's not from the stars. It's when God said, "Let there be light" on the first day. And that's it. That is the light rising. We can still see it or detect it. It's radiation now. But that, based on Scripture and our understanding, this is the light from the very beginning of creation. And we can still detect it. And I got some various pictures of it. Now, this is the Big Bang idea about it, where they're looking at the light horizon, and then you have the stars later that are closer. And of course, it's wrong. But now, with the model that I was working on, and this is a little bit, I probably should have put this in a different frame. But when I was looking at 2 Peter 3:8, with that equation, I had crunched it, where the day, 1,000 years is a day, ended up equaling days squared. And what it means is, if you're looking at light from that light horizon, you have this effective time where it's perceived to be days squared, but actual time is still in days. So you have the effective time in days, like you have 10 to the 0, which is 1, 10 to 1, which is 10. These are powers, time in days, and then over here on the other side, radius in light days. This is of the universe. So this is my model that I've called the first flash model. And this is the Big Bang Theory, where they have this crazy inflation period where it just all of a sudden accelerates way beyond the speed of light. And then it slows down again, and then it speeds up again. And I refer to that as ludicrous speed. So some more pictures, and I'll just kind of skim through these because we're kind of running out of time. And then I had this joke: simplicity. The simplest solutions are often the cleverest. They're also usually wrong. And this is a geometry where find x, and they circled it instead of calculating it. And this goes hand in glove with how the Big Bang Theory works, because they go to this. This is the foundation to relativity. And it's that Pythagorean theorem. The CT, well, the letter C deals with speed of light. And I found out the speed of light is not constant. There's actually two kinds of speed of light. And when they times each other, that's when you get the c squared. Which means this, relying on this value here to explain how everything works, it's going to come out wrong, unless there's no matter present. So it doesn't work. And that's why, and I'm not going to explain this stuff, it's just too much. But here's a kind of an illustration why you could look at something and perceive it to be one way, and you'd be completely wrong. Call it house on a hill. So you have a man just bought a house on a hill, wants to figure out the driving distance to the mailbox at the base of the hill. Just recently he managed to reach the mailbox in just 3 minutes with his fancy new sports car. As a result, he also wants to figure out what his average speed was. So we have some facts. We see in 0 minutes he's at the top of the hill. In 1 minute he's traveled 1 mile closer to the mailbox. And every minute he's a mile closer. And in 3 minutes he reaches the mailbox. So the speculation is the car drove 3 miles in 3 minutes, therefore the car was traveling 60 miles per hour. Looks good, but it's wrong. Reality, the car was accelerating as it traveled a total distance of 9 miles in 3 minutes. The car's average speed was actually 180 miles per hour, not 60, because he's traveling in a spiral. And it's the same thing with our measuring of light. So here's where I kind of broke down my equation a little bit more. So you have light horizon, time dilation is days times how many days in 1,000 years, so you get this 365,000. And then you have it the other way, 365,250 dividing days in an illegal day squared. This is what happens when you take the values with, like WMAP studies the light horizon and says, well, they made a measurement in February and claimed that the universe was 13.69 billion years old. March 17th of 2006, they changed that, says 13.7 billion. February 2008, 13.73 billion years. Does anybody feel like they're billions of years old? Why is their numbers changing in just a few years every time they make a measurement? I put these values with these billions of years, I put it in my day squared equation. These values in the day squared equation all point to a creation date between 4,120 and 4,128 BC. And this is upsetting some physicists out there. I posted this on the internet and they are not happy. They're not happy that I'm posting this on the internet. So I looked up this 4,124 BC because it didn't match with Usher. Most people look at Usher as the creation date of 4004 BC. And I discovered this man, Martin Anstey. He has this book called The Romance of Bible-Chronology. It's a very interesting book. I thought it was very interesting that there was someone that points to that same year as creation and looked at Bible chronology and got that value. So here's some more verses. Psalms 104 verses 1 and 2.
Praise the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty. He wraps himself in light as with a garment. He stretches out the heavens like a tent.
And Isaiah 40 verses 21 and 22.
Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and his people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy, and spreads them out like a tent to live in.
Okay, and I'm going to just fast forward. All of these verses refers to God stretching the heavens. And that's exactly the effect that I was referring to earlier with the day squared. Where if light is traveling through a medium and it's being stretched, it doesn't have to travel faster. It can keep traveling at the speed of light. But the universe is being stretched, and it's stretching light with it. And that brought me to this man, Roger Penrose, and his twister theory. It's a picture. But I was trying to find what the reason was. What's this day squared business? Why should it be day squared? And I thought about it, and it's like I'm dealing with light, and I'm dealing with the period of a day. And a day is basically a time that Earth rotates. So comparing the two, you have light that travels basically in a straight line, and then you have rotation, which is curved. It came to the conclusion there must be two types of dimensions. You have one that's dealing with rotation, and one dealing with light traveling straight, and they times each other. And I started researching and found Roger Penrose's twister theory that says the same thing. So I'm going to kind of explain it from something that I found in Superstrings. It's far simpler than most books explain on twister theory, but twister origins. During the early 1960s, Penrose began to think about a new quantum object that could be used to build up the notion of a quantum space. And that quantum is basically just quantifying, where you have the very smallest component. What was needed was a quantum object that embodies some notion of linear momentum, a linear moment. Spin is associated with what is called angular momentum. The new quantum object must combine angular momentum with linear momentum, and on equal footing. It must be an object that is both spinning and moving along. In addition, it must be both quantum mechanical and relativistic. That goes back to the toes and guts, unifying the two kinds of theories. Penrose's twister was to fulfill all these requirements. It was also to bring together a number of other key ideas that Penrose had been working on, the significance of complex numbers and their geometry. The role played by light rays in relativity, also called null lines, and the special ways in which physical solutions are singled out in quantum field theory. So, anyway, moving on. So I've got a few pictures of a pattern, what would happen if you had a field of things moving in a circle. Here you have, this is a toroid or a torus. Now this gets interesting. So you see this, it's moving up and around in a cycle. You can take that same geometry and turn it into a flat surface. So we would see the flat surface, that's our normal reality. But the physics that are in our universe is the torus. And you can also pass through a torus and you're still in another one. This would be where, say, one of these toruses is the quantum realm and the other would be relativity. And so some more little illustrations. That was not working. That was not really working. This is kind of another illustration of a torus to kind of help visualize. This is a scrolling torus, actually, where you have something moving up and curling around and curling inside. Now this is Penrose's twister, where it scrolls and it gets smaller inside. So it's curling, it's moving around, and it's scrolling inside. It's hard to illustrate. But I got a few pictures. Yeah, another same thing. So now I go on to the geometry of my model, and it's pretty much the same thing. I'm not going to explain all that. This is another picture. And here I'm actually showing how the laws of physics can be described with this pattern in geometry. All the laws of physics. This would be a theory, a toe theory, a theory of everything. All this from a verse in the Bible. Who would have thought? This is someone else's work, Hermine, and his model is very similar. And he's got his reasons for, and he's going for a theory of everything as well with his toroid configuration. And that's not working. So, going back to the secret properties of light, which I didn't really fully explain. Here I try to illustrate it. You have light where it's traveling, the speed of the signal of light is traveling basically in a straight line. And then you have the speed of the wave. So you have like a wave and how fast the crest of the wave moves across. And that's called phase velocity. So you have group velocity, phase velocity. If you turn both into a circle, you get this pattern, wheel within a wheel. You end up with 6 dimensions of space, through your curve, through your linear, and 2 dimensions of time. One is time you normally think about. The other is a period, which is the period of a wave. These are all things that are tangible and real. You can perceive wavelength in reality. It's not some hidden dimension somewhere. Anyway, it comes down over here. If you take the group velocity times the phase velocity, you get that famous c squared that you see in relativity. And so I rewrote relativity up up here with mu v equals z, where the u and the v are phase and group velocity. That's why at that earlier slide, where I had the triangle, why his relativity is wrong. And I try to explain it here. We have, say, light and vacuum, C, the value C, and you have like strawberries. There's like 9 chocolate-colored strawberries there. And here, if you stretch it, so the phase velocity is faster than the speed of light, the group velocity is slower, you still have the same value, it's just a different dimension. So I'm saying C, light vacuum is always 186,000 miles per hour. Velocity of u is maximum at c. The velocity of v is maximum at c. Is minimum at c. The two together is also always c squared. Now here's where the folding comes in, or unfolding. Going back to the Bible, talking about God stretching the heavens. If you think of group velocity, the green, the u, as dimension up, and the phase velocity is the dimension going across this way, the upper corner, or u times v, is c squared. If you fold the two together, like right here, you perceive them as the same thing, but you can still get a measurement of c squared. So you can have dimensions folded, and as a result, you end up perceiving two sets of dimensions as though they were the same thing. And they unfold as the universe expands. I should have changed this a little. I was trying to illustrate how these dimensions work. I'm going to kind of skip those. So, as a result of this model, you have what's called homogeneous expansion, where all points are centers of visible universe expansion. Astronomy or cosmology already teaches that. I've added to that another layer of homogeneous rotation, where all points are centers of visible universe rotation. And that's true if you look at little quantum mechanical stuff. If you look in empty space, there's rotation there, and they don't really have an explanation for it. So, this model makes predictions about our universe that are anomalies. The first one's the horizon anomaly. I have this magazine, Scientific American, Is the Universe Out of Tune? And I'll read a little bit of that real quick. Starts out, like the discord of key instruments in a skillful orchestra quickly playing the wrong piece, mysterious discrepancies have arisen between theory and observations of the music of the cosmic microwave background. Either the measurements are wrong or the universe is stranger than we thought. Models such as the lambda cold dark matter cannot calculate the exact pattern of fluctuations, yet they can predict the statistical properties similar to predicting their average size. So they basically talk about that they have a model that predicts things. Because such properties arise in many different models, they are considered generic predictions of inflation. Inflation is where the universe is expanding at an enormous rate. If inflation is true at all, these predictions hold irrespective of their finer details of the model. To falsify one of them would be to challenge the scenario of inflation in the most serious way a scientific theory can be challenged. This is what the anomalous CMB measurements do. And I haven't explained them yet. But, another comment in here says, the results could send us back to the drawing board about the early universe. So basically there is a disproof with this component to the Big Bang Theory, and they're scrambling to try to eliminate it. And here's basically, I'm going to try to explain this without really getting too in-depth. If you have a point, you have 2 points in the distant horizon. They're 60 degrees apart. And have 3 points in time. So at Roman numeral I, there's no light. It's like 14 billion years ago. and things are expanding at a crazy rate. So now, at 2, it's 380,000 years later, and light comes to the scene. And light starts to travel from CMB1 towards CMB2. And light from CMB2 starts to travel where Earth is. Okay, so now at 3 today, that light from the first point finally reaches point 2. A light from point 2 finally reaches Earth, and it hasn't been affected by anything. Well, that's not what they see. What they see is this. They see light coming from the second point that's been affected by the first point, and they can't figure out why. Well, here's the explanation. At the beginning, we know that there was light. Genesis 1:3. 6,000, according to the model, 6,935 years ago, where light traveled from point 1 to point 2. And then today, by his understanding, he stretched out the heavens, Jeremiah 11:12. So that light from point 2 that had been affected by point 1 reaches Earth, and it's been affected. That's what they're observing, and it conflicts with their theory altogether. And these are just some pictures of geometry space. I'm going to skip through those. Okay, second anomaly, Pioneer. I was looking at my model, and I saw that I was trying to think of a way of testing it. And one theory was, or one thing that it predicted was that if an object traveled a light day away, and light was traveling back to Earth, that light would appear to come back sooner than it was supposed to. So I pondered, did we send anything far enough to have this effect? Well, we did. And then I discovered what was called the Pioneer anomaly, where they sent probes, like the Pioneer probe, and it's traveled a light day away from Earth, and light is traveling back sooner than it's supposed to, and they don't have an explanation for it. Okay, the third anomaly, time warp. This is a pulsar. The time warp anomaly, they look at pulsars as like what they call a standard candle, where time or effects with one pulsar is going to be the same with another. Well, they noticed pulsars further away, things were happening slower, and they didn't have an explanation. If you could bring up that video. There was 360 million light years away, and another pulsar that was 1 billion light years away, and there's a 60% time dilation between the two. Well, I created this equation, this program, that has those two distances, and I'm putting in the values there, to see what my model would predict would be the amount of time dilation between those two objects. And I took a little bit of time because I thought maybe it'd take a while to make the calculation, but I've got all these different values. I've got A plus X, B, B1, and then you see a little bit of math between the different things. The line across the bottom is light years. Or let's see. No, the line going up and down, I believe, was distance, and the line going across was time. So I finally push calculate, and I get the 60%, just as predicted. And I'm pointing out, see where the different values of distance and how they changed and where they finally ended up. So these objects are moving away from each other. Space and time are being stretched at the same time. And then there's a rate of dilation between the two. So you can go ahead and shut that off. So that caused more fury on the internet as I was posting some of this stuff. Now, on top of all of that, my mother asked me about this model. She said, well, your original focus was figuring out how long it took for light from stars to reach Earth. And I didn't know. So I went ahead and tried to figure it out. So I went back to Genesis chapter 1, and the model has the universe expanding at a rate of days squared, or rate of light days squared. So every day the distance it would square in speed. But stars weren't created till day 4. And so I looked at the model, and it came out that, well, I guess I should read this first. The Sabbath was given, this is from Illinois, the Sabbath was given to all mankind to commemorate the work of creation, the great Jehovah, when he had laid the foundations of the earth, when he had dressed the whole world in its garb of beauty, and created all the wonders of the land and sea, instituted the Sabbath day and made it holy. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy, the Sabbath was set apart as a God's memorial. God sanctified and blessed the day in which he had rested from all his wondrous work. And this Sabbath, sanctified by God, was to be kept as a perpetual covenant. It was a memorial that was to stand from the age to age till the close of earth's history. And that's in Lift Him Up, page 53. The key point was the morning stars singing together. But so anyway, with the model, which is here, and it's not showing up that well, but I traced it out, and it turned out that the stars created closest to Earth, the light would have reached Earth at the end of the 6th day, at twilight, and then the stars created furthest away would have reached the Earth at the end of the Sabbath, at twilight. I don't think that's coincidental. So, next, the section, Light from Heaven. And these are obviously the 3 angels' messages. Revelation 14, verses 6 and 7. This is the verse we read earlier today. If someone could read that. So, part of the first angel's message is giving account to God creating the heavens and the earth. I think that's an important message that we have today. And so, the next question is time running out for our universe? So we have Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12.
And thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thine hands. 10 through 12, I'm sorry. They shall perish, but thou remainest. And they all shall wax old as does the garment. And as a vesture shalt thou fold them up, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years shall not fail.
Notice in that verse, it's just the opposite of things being stretched. It says things are going to be folded up. So now I've got this comment in Scientific American. Before I read that, I should mention with my model, well, I guess I'll read this first. One of the theories of ending the universe is called the Big Rip, where the universe tears itself to pieces. This can happen if dark energy is not constant. At most, models suppose, but gains in power. Hypothesized in 1999, this extravagant dark energy goes by the name of phantom energy. It drives the universe to expand by an infinite amount. Even atoms get shredded and finishes off time. In some scenarios, the end comes, of course, they say like billions of years from now. Now, I took the values of the Big Rip, I put it in my equation, and the reason I looked at that one is because my model has things accelerating as they're expanding, and they're accelerating much faster than in their models. Well, instead of this big event of the Big Rip happening 20 billion years from now, if creation was in 4124 BC, this is pointing to something like 2035, which is just, it's not
that's not very long from now. This is a little bit scary. And I don't know, this is more of a conjecture. I'm not purporting that things are necessarily going to happen that way. But here's some other verses. I don't really have time to read through them all, but one of these verses talks about the heavens disappearing like smoke, which is the effect I would predict with the Big Rip model, where things are expanding away so fast that you don't see light from the stars. And just kind of an interesting picture where you have stars disappearing, you got this black spot there. Yeah, I'm going to skip through those two. So, anyway, finishing this off in Fundamentals of Education, Ellen White comments, "A knowledge of science of all kinds is power, and it is the purpose of God that advanced science shall be taught in our schools as a preparation for the work that is to precede the closing scenes of Earth's history." Has anyone else heard this before? I didn't know about this before. I was startled actually finding this. "The truth is to go to the remotest bounds of the earth through agents trained for the work." So apparently, there is a work to be done in finishing the gospel message through advanced science. And, I mean, it's right there. If you believe Ellen White, she states it right there, very clearly. So, I'm going to go ahead and close with prayer. Dear Lord, which art in heaven, thank you for this Sabbath day. Please fill us with your Holy Spirit, guide us and direct us that we might be a witness to others of that you are indeed the Creator, and that we might spread the gospel throughout the world and witnessing your love for us. In blessed name I pray. Amen.
Amen.